Why do you scream at me? Why do you think that it's free? It's not a choice made by me. Once we fall, soon you'll see. When I looked into your eyes, I can see we need to change our lives. Let me in, then we both win. But not knowing that you're killing me. This silence is building, tearing me fearfully. This silence is building, tearing me. I'm screaming.
Greetings and salutations, Ben here, and welcome to the Sunday Night Hang, right here hanging on Sunday nights. Perfect. If you're new, please subscribe, and if you're returning, welcome back. Tonight I have good pleasure for good friendship, returning once again, Hoss himself, Simon Hosford, my brother from down under, who's been just melting faces and wetting panties and all, I don't know, doing things to body parts while out gigging and around. We're talking offhand and off air, I should say. And yeah, welcome back, my friend.
Thank you so much, brother. Always a pleasure to be on and catch up with you and see what's been happening in your world. And of course, awesome to catch up with everyone in the chat too. I can already see, you got Charles Green, Holly Lewis, Don DeShane, Charmaine, who's just made it back to the UK, and it's pretty cold up there too, I think.
Right? Yeah. Let's see. Who else we got here? Holly Lewis. Yeah. Awesome. Symmetry. Vince RJ. Thomas Santiago. We've got Max Josephson. BC Rich 581. T. Ricky. Let's see here. Ryan Hall. Yeah. Hip Metalworks. JP Page 2. John Gregory. We got Lee Elbarge. Mark's Gas Station. Terry's 3Gs. Rob Baker. Good to see ya. There's John, fellow Melbourne resident. It's good to see.
Indeed.
Let's see who else we have in here. Christopher?
I need my glasses to read some of these.
Yeah.
John's saying I do wet panties. It's just that I don't tell anyone they're mine.
Well, yeah. It's the only thing that was clean, honest. LRM Guitar. Yeah, I am doing double duty. I was moderating for Pete Thorne half an hour ago. Well, actually, even 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And I wanted to welcome in. We've got a new channel member, Dave Chase. Before the show even started, welcome to the club. Enjoy your exclusive content and Zoom calls twice a month that we all hang out on and talk gear and everything else in the world. What's up, Christopher Butler, Tom Lind? Bring on the goggles for reading. Exactly. I've been wearing them for a long time.
These days, absolutely. Yeah. I just had to, for the first time ever, I've been wearing the cheap pharmacy kind of just magnifiers, but I thought I better really get it sorted out. So I went to get my prescription done and choose out some, as George in Seinfeld would say, some very exciting new frames. And hopefully they're not ladies' ones. And picked out some frames. So I've got some proper reading glasses on the way. And I thought for things such as this, where you're sitting in front of a camera, you can get these lenses now that are non-reflective, which I didn't know about. So that was good. So I got some of them.
Nice. There's Charles 75N and Dylan Washburn. What's up, Dylan? Good to see you. I missed the live show on you on Thursday. Caught the replay. Enjoyed it. Who else did I see sneak in here? All Dave, all night. Awesome. Josh Hamburg made it as well. Nick Beatty, my newest subscriber. He subscribed about half an hour ago. Pete said, check out the show. So, well, we can't disappoint Pete Thorne, Haas. I'm just saying. He said, everyone should come over and watch. So here they are.
That's wonderful. I haven't haven't managed to catch one of Pete's shows for a while. How's he doing?
Good. Currently on tour with the Classic Rock Show in the UK. So it was post-gig hang for him.
Yeah. So from his hotel room, perhaps, or something? Was it at the venue?
Dressing room. He did dressing room.
Dressing room.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Jim Cox, welcome to the club. Another YouTube member. Awesome.
That is the great thing about Pete is he'll do his show from wherever he is in the world, whether it's a dressing room, his hotel room, whether it's at home. It's, you know, to keep up with everyone and keep in touch. It's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know about you, but usually for me, after I do a gig, I just want to like eat and go to bed. I don't really feel like I love these people. I don't know if I want to hang out with y'all for an hour after a gig, but
yep.
Sure.
No, I'm the same. Once the gig is done, and obviously depending on whether it goes really well, and of course occasionally some of them don't, will be how much I feel like hanging out after the gig. But yeah, food definitely, because I don't really like eating much before the gig, you know. So
no,
I'll save the feast in whatever form that comes, whether it ends up being an actual feast of properly, you know, chef catered food, or whether it ends up just being doing a run at a junk food joint. It's I'll save that till afterwards. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. Charles Green in the chat. How you doing, Charles?
Yeah, great to see Charles Green in here. Quentin James, Absolute Mayhem as well. Hobo Roadie, what's happening? Joe Alba's here.
Jeff K.
Hard to melt faces on a full belly. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, hard to do a lot of things on a full belly, but yeah.
Graphite and Cigar says, we need fish and chips. Yes, unlike Pete Thorne, I can gig after eating fish and chips.
Right.
He said he could. No, he said he could. The singer said he couldn't. That's what it was. He's like, I can eat it for lunch, but maybe not right before. I was like,
Yeah, I could probably do fish and chips for lunch if the gig was that evening, no problem. But yeah, not 2 hours before. That's not going to work at all.
I probably wouldn't eat a whole lot, but I would eat some of it.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
Elbart says I played some senior center gigs and my audience was asleep. Sure.
Well,
and half were yelling to turn it up, and the other half were yelling to turn it down. I bet.
I've done gigs, and some of them were only about 6 months ago, where the sound check after we arrived in this city to set up and do sound check, we got pushed back for 2 hours, and it got pushed back because we couldn't interrupt the bingo that was happening with all the elderly folk in the room. So, apparently we were on after the puppet show, so to speak. You know.
Yeah, that's
really funny.
Something.
Yeah. You know, you're a high priority when
before gigs. No, definitely not, Michael Kress.
Yeah,
Waffle House. Yeah, you could do something there. So I noticed that some people were noticing some Stratocaster-shaped objects over your shoulder there. I'm going to say that may be related to the last time you were talking about playing some of that Yngwie Malmsteen type music, and you're working on some chops for that. And I see I'll call it buttercream Strat. Who the price started life is white Strats, and he played them in smoky bars.
I think that color. Yeah, you're right. I think that color actually started out life as originally in the 70s or whatever, Olympic white. But because of the nitro finish, they would go kind of yellowy and buttery,
Mm-hmm.
But I think now that Fender actually build them as buttercream is, I think, the color, and
which looks awesome on a Strat. I love buttercream.
Yeah. No, they're cool. There are a couple of Strats. There are a couple of beautiful Strats that my guitar guy Joe Acapinti built for me, and they're beautiful. One of them stays in standard tuning for. I just did a gig on the weekend actually with an Australian artist, Daryl Braithwaite, and the Strat just works perfect for his gig. So that one stays in standard tuning, and then the other one's tuned down and is getting most of the work done at the moment for this. I've stupidly agreed with the Melbourne Guitar Show, which is the first time they've put one on because of COVID since I did the Van Halen thing at the last one in 2019.
Right.
And And so they said, look, we'd like to have you back. What do you want to do this time? And it was tempting to say, well, let's do another Van Halen album. You know, that went down
You
pretty
Van
well.
Halen too. You did the first one.
So my initial thought actually was to do Van Halen 2. I thought that seemed logical and
Sure.
chronological as well. But then I thought, I mean, Van Halen wasn't my only influence when I was a young teenager, and I thought it might be interesting just to kind of shake things up a bit and give myself a headache, but give myself a challenge that was going to be completely unique and also fresh to everybody else's ears as well. So so we agreed that I would do an Yngwie Malmsteen album, Note for Note, which is going to be his trilogy record actually.
Ooh.
And so I've got about 4.5 weeks to get it together, of which I think I've learned maybe about 50% of the licks on the album. So I'm not even just in practice mode right now. I've still got learning to do. And the only problem with that is because Malmsteen for me was just never something that I could play very well. I sort of gave up when I was 16 years old. I kept going with like my other idols, like whether it was, Van Halen or Steve Lukather or George Benson and,
Sure.
players like that. But I just could not figure out how. I mean, I had those. Remember in Guitar World magazine, you could buy. There'd always be an ad page for cassettes that you could get with basically like an instructional or tutorials, but done from somebody like Wolf Marshall or somebody like that, and it would take you through how to play the solos note for note. But none of them ever mention it. And I've got all the books as well. Back when I was a teenager, I bought the trilogy album book transcribed and a bunch of other things. But no one ever talked about how they were doing the picking. In fact, they didn't talk about it in Steve Vai books and Van Halen books and stuff like that either. So you had a fair chance that maybe like the fingering was correct with the left hand, but no one ever talked about how they're picking it. And it took me only until about 3 years ago to realize that the reason I could never play the Malmsteen stuff is because he picks using directional picking with his right hand, even when he's playing a simple scale. And I just discovered that because I thought I stupidly sat down one day with Final Cut Pro and I grabbed all these bits of his right hand playing on live footage from YouTube and imported them and then slowed it down frame by frame and zoomed in. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. That's how he's doing it. And it's very, very foreign to me. So I'm taking myself through a sort of a right hand boot camp of how to play all this stuff the way he plays it. So so 4.5 weeks is not a very long time to get this together, but I've just confirmed all the details in the contract with the Melbourne Guitar Show, and it's going to be fun. It's definitely going to be fun and a challenge, but I'm looking forward to it.
Sure. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And yes, fact, John mentioned it in the chat, and we were talking about it off air. He says, how about the awesome Guitar Wars gigs you just did?
Oh, yeah. So that was like 2 weekends ago around here in Melbourne. And I did get to catch up with John ZD351, which was awesome. And it was essentially like a colleague of mine, a great guitarist called Tim Henwood, had an idea to just do some casual gigs, kind of like a G3 thing, really, I guess, but just on a smaller scale. And we would do like rock pubs around Melbourne, and it went really, really well. So there was just the three of us. So it was myself, Tim Henwood, who plays for Rogue Traders, Super Jesus, had his own band called the Androids, which had a big single in Australia. And then Dave Leslie from the Baby Animals, which most people would know, Australian band with a female singer that toured supporting Van Halen for a long time around the States. So it was the three of us, and it was great because there was no parameters that we had to stick by. We didn't have to sort of play all in the same genre or anything. So it was, we'd all play for half an hour doing anything we wanted to play. And then at the end, we'd all get up and jam old 70s AC/DC songs and stuff. So it was really, really fun. Really fun. Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
Sorry, go on. No, it was fantastic, and it was because I mean, you know, Ben, that I spent a lot of my time sort of being guitarist for hire as a session guy, playing for different artists like Daryl, who I just mentioned, and a bunch of other people in Australia. It's pretty rare though, where you get to do gigs where you can just cherry pick anything you wanted to play. So I just mixed it up with played some Satriani, played some Van Halen, I played one Malmsteen song, and I'm glad I only picked one because that really showed me how much work I've got to do for the Melbourne Guitar Show. I was like, wow, okay, this is going to be harder than I thought. But it was great because I could use these shows as a kind of a like a testing ground for, because it's one thing to sit in your studio or your bedroom or your lounge room or wherever and with a guitar on your lap and play the licks, but it's a whole other thing to be playing them at 105 decibels and in front of people, where you just don't.
Very true.
There's too many other distractions with a live gig. You just don't have the same level of concentration, and of course, you pretty much don't have the same level of warm up either, because I can warm up for 2 hours sitting on my couch and then be like, oh, I can play this stuff, no problem. But at these gigs, you're lugging in equipment, so you're bringing in Marshall boxes and stuff, and then you might be lucky to get 10 minutes to warm up before you go on. By the time you've set up, sound checked, had something to eat, and then the show's on. So yeah, it was interesting. It was a good litmus test, shall I say? It's very interesting.
John says, it was a great show. All three guitars were fantastic, and the rhythm section was killer. Awesome.
Yeah, we were really lucky.
Keep joining in. We got 72 people watching. Please give us a like if you haven't already. And lots of friends jumping in here tonight. Awesome.
Yeah, we were really fortunate. We got one of the best drummers and one of the best bass players in all of the country, in John Salerno on drums and Chris Becker on bass. And they are two of Australia's absolute top touring session guys, and they can pretty much play anything. In fact, the three of us used to have an instrumental trio back in the day that we just called our surnames, Salerno, Hosford, Becker. And we wrote some of our own things, but we'd also just make little instrumental trio versions of anything we found interesting. So, we did, we made a rock version out of an old Dave Weckl tune. What else do we do? We did some Scott Henderson stuff, Michael Landau, just whatever, it was really just a fun band for us. And it was the first time the three of us have got to just jam on stage for a while, for quite a few years. So it was fun being with them. But yeah, so they played for all three of us, of course. So it was the same rhythm section for the whole show. But they're killer, really killer.
Awesome.
So yeah, we were
Metalhead
really,
Hippie.
really lucky.
And Mikey Mojo in the chat. Welcome.
Hey, Mikey.
Yeah. If you have any questions for either of us, please ask away. We have no problem with doing that. John Duchesne asks, can you give us a rig rundown for a live rock show?
Do you mean, John, for the Malmsteen one, or just any rock show that I would do? Does it say, Ben, in the question?
It does not say. I'll let you choose.
John, if you could let me know. Yeah, I will tell you. What I used for the Guitar Wars show was a pretty simple setup. It was just my Marshall Plexi, 25-watt greenbacks in the cabinet, and kind of my regular touring pedal board that I use for, when I'm just doing my regular touring stuff, which I'd be happy to do a rundown for anyone that wants to check out my sort of just, one size fits all touring pedal board. Because, of course, like all of our pedal boards, it changes so much, from month to month.
He was saying on a typical rock gig. And by the way, and thank you, Keith H., for the super chat. He says, dig baby animals, still have shirts on the back across and the shoulders upside down. Says, let go of my ears. Awesome, Keith. Thank you very much. So, yeah. Typical rock gig.
Typical rock gig. I would say if it's a gig that I'm putting on, then most of the time I would use my Plexi and my 412, and then it depends. Like with the Van Halen thing, I'll hardly use any pedals. I'll just dime the Plexi and run it through, you know, a reactive load or something. Whereas if it's not that kind of thing and I don't need the power amp distortion, and it can be more preamp distortion. Well, like for example, what I did with the Guitar Wars show was just my Plexi, my vintage 4x12, and then my normal touring pedal board. So then I'm getting the distortion really from the pedals more than from the Marshall. The Marshall's kind of acting in the same way that, you know, if I hired a backline amp for a tour with an artist, which tends to be Fenders of some kind, you know, the Blues Deluxes or the Hot Rod Deluxes or the DeVilles. I found that for backline stuff, they're the most consistent. And the pedals I have on my board now can actually sound pretty Marshall-y even with one of those Fenders. And so even with a Marshall head or a Plexi or something, I'll tend to run them pretty clean and then let the pedals do the heavy lifting. But like I said, the exception to that obviously would be if I'm doing the Van Halen thing, then I'm using the amp for the distortion, and using my Plexi. As far as the pedals go, I have the Wampler Bell, which, as most people know, is kind of like the Nobles OD1. OD1, I think, is the model name, but it's essentially that green little pedal that a lot of people in Nashville used to use, and Wampler does a great recreation of it. I use that for what I call my first stage gain sound, where it's kind of like a bit gritty but not full distortion. You know, so if I'm on a Strat and I'm on the neck pickup, it'll give me that sort of juicy, bluesy, spongy kind of thing, but still with a pretty transparent top end. So bluesy in a way that still there's good transient and pick attack. So I'll use that for that. And then for a rhythm sound, I cascade the bell into a Vemuram Shanks OD1 or ODR1. I forget the thing of that, but it's the Shanks Vemuram pedal. That thing sounds unbelievable. That's just one of the best distortion pedals I've ever had. And the combination of the Shanks and the bell together just sound super cool. So I'll use that for my rhythm sound. And then the pedal that's been, and I think we spoke about this, Ben, last time too, the pedal that I use for my sort of higher gain, you know, smooth legato solo sound is the LPD 87. And that's been my go-to for the solo sound for a while.
Using that on the green channel or the red channel?
Red. Yeah.
That's right.
Red, and with the gain pretty high. Not all the way up, but pretty high. I mean, the green channel sounds great too. It's just that I just really love. I love the tone shaping capabilities in the 87, but I also love the actual type of distortion, like the tone of it itself. But the controls on there are really, really great because unlike a lot of other higher gain distortion pedals, like for me, I need my solo sound to have a very specific amount of bottom end and mid range and tops. I actually tend to not have that much bottom end in it because I'm not using it for the chugga stuff. I want it for like a flowing lead line. And the 87 allows you to cut quite a lot of bottom end, but it still never sounds thin. That's the thing that I love about it. And I've got the mids fairly cranked, 2 o'clock or something like that, I'd say. And I've got the presence and the treble down a bit from, like 10 o'clock, something like that. But the range of tones that you can get from it, especially if I'm doing a session, is fantastic. But for my live stuff, it tends to, like, I cut most of the bass, cut some of the presence and treble, and boost a bit of mids. And it still doesn't sound really mid-rangey. You'd think by looking at the controls, well, you've taken all the tops and bottoms off and boosted mids, it'll sound too honky and too nosy, to that 1K kind of thing. But it doesn't at all. It's just the most natural mid-range. It's great. In fact, if anyone wants to hear me playing a little Ingve using that pedal, I just before this show actually just flipped up a short 30-second clip on my Insta page. So,
Cool.
and it's using the Strat behind me, the Marshall set basically clean, and the LPD 87, and that's all it is. Just those three things, and it sounds really good, really
Nice. Nice.
So that's
Fruitcake
so as
Tony
far
in the
as-
house. Kurt 5150. Good to see you guys.
Yeah, hey Kurt, hey Tony.
Richard Nangamitsu was asking, he goes, who is this guest? Well, this is Simon Hosford, who's played with a number of artists as professional sideman and also a session player. He's been around the world and maybe even back home again, which is always nice. For a variety of
it's
artists.
always nice to make it. Although I have to tell you, I'm always a little bit sad to go back home when I'm leaving Canada or the States because, I've been fortunate enough to tour over your way a lot, and I just always have such a great time, and the people are so nice. And over the years, I've got to make, of course, some good friends in different cities too. So really, coming home from, it depends where I am, obviously, but coming home from your part of the world is I'm never that excited about. And especially because of COVID and everything, I haven't actually been over your way for maybe 5-6 years now, probably.
Right.
Which is the longest time I've not been here. What's that?
Christopher asks, he has a question for me. He goes, hey, do you like having your live stream right after Pete Thorne with him on UK time? Seems like it would be less of breaking up your day into chunks. Yeah, I enjoy having Pete Thorne as an opening act. I'm not going to lie.
I think it's also very kind of Pete to volunteer to be your opening act too, Ben. Very kind.
Yes.
It's the kind of guy he is, right?
He is, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
John Duquesne asked, the 87 is a Marshall in a box deal? The Marshall in a box deal. Yeah.
Yeah, Lawrence and I are in touch with each other. Really, Ben, ever since you kind of made me aware of Lawrence and LPD Pedals, and he's just been such a sweetheart. If I've ever got a question about something, like he'll message me right back. And not everyone that is a manufacturer and designs the stuff that we use is the kind of personality that's happy to be constantly in touch with, DMs and stuff like that. And I totally understand it. It's because they're busy actually making things,
Right.
But Lawrence has been great, and I'm really, really pleased. I'm so pleased that my favorite solo sound, and this is over all the different pedals that I still have in a box that I've collected since I was 13 years old. And some of them are really, really great. But I'm so pleased that it's Lawrence's pedal, the 87, that is my favorite, and that has stayed on the board for, I would say the last 2 years, or from whenever I bought it, which I think was about a couple of years ago during COVID.
Right.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Pedal. But yeah, like I said, if anyone wants to hear it, check out my most recent post on my Insta page, and you'll hear it with just a Marshall set clean and a Strat.
Yeah. What's up, Surfer B? Good to see you. Let's see here. BC wrote very kind words. I don't think I could run circles around Pete, even literally. Surfer B asked, does Simon have a favorite guitar? Number one.
Number one? No, I don't. And it's really only just because I sort of do too many different things. And what I try and do is capture that sound as authentically as possible. So for when I'm doing the Van Halen thing, I've obviously got like my favorite guitar for that, which I can show you is the one from Daily Customs, which is which Neil built me bespoke as a sort of a replica of the Live Without a Net 5150 guitar that Eddie used. But so for the Van Halen stuff, that's my favorite. And then for my day-to-day gigs and sessions and touring stuff, I'd say I've got two favorites. I'll grab them and show you if you like.
Sure.
So this one began life essentially as just a Mexican player series,
Mm-hmm.
which in Australia are not that expensive. So I imagine probably a bit less for you. But I think here they're like 1,100. So I don't know, maybe less than $1,000 for you guys.
About the same here.
So
About
it's
the
just
same.
about the same, yeah. So it just started life as that, and all I did was everything stock except I changed the pickups in it, and I put locking machine heads on the back, just because I love them.
Sure.
It's so much
Matthew.
quicker to. I string my guitars before every gig and every rehearsal, so locking machine heads for me just speeds everything up, and plus the tuning stability is pretty good. So
Exactly.
yeah, so this is like, if I went to a recording session, the two guitars I would take, I mean, it depends if the session is specific and I need to take a Telecaster or a Les Paul or something.
Sure.
But if they were like, no, just bring your stuff, I would probably bring that. Or
Hello to Joe.
I'd bring this one.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's really, sorry, it's got a flappy D string at the moment because I just busted it the other day. But
I thought it was just detuned. That's all.
oh yeah, the D string's tuned down 4 octaves. So
that looks like one of those metal tunings when they see strings hanging off like that.
Yeah.
So the question was, what pickups are you running in your two guitars?
Okay, that's a good question.
You're gear nerds.
I know that. No, please feel free to ask me whatever you want. It's fine. I love all this stuff too. The single coils in this are bare knuckle mother's milks. So they're kind of vintage, relatively low output, just beautiful sounding natural vintage pickups. They're not noise cancelling or anything like that. I'm going to have to think for a minute on what the humbucker is that I put in there again. I will remember it, so give me a minute.
And that's right, Kurt. That's Boner Jams tuning. Yeah. Speaking of Boner Jams, there he is. He says, heard we're talking about guitars and Kurt 5150's Mormons Only page. Hope everyone has a great week. Great show, Ben. Love you, brother Boner Jams. Part of the Under the Bus Network. They were on last night. Late night. And Wednesdays as well. Check them out, folks. Yeah.
Actually, give me a second, everyone. I'll be right back.
Sure. I want to say hello as well to Robert Ramford in the house. Nick Beatty's here. Who else we got here? Herb, Keith, and Mikey Mojo. Mikey Mojo. What did I say? Something else earlier, I think. I don't know. Matthew stopped in. Joe's here. Of course, Symmetry and Hip Metal Works. I don't think they go anywhere without each other. I'm just saying. Yeah. Again, if you're watching for the first time, please subscribe and, of course, hit that like. Helps us out. Algorithms and stuff. You know, trying to get a fella to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Trying. I don't know if it's working. Maybe also one of the moderators could throw the link to Haas's Instagram feed. He's big on the Instas. I'm just saying. Let's see if I missed any questions. Is that the white Strat with Floyd from the Melbourne Guitar Show? Yeah, it's possible. Awesome, Matthew. That's good to hear. Arthur Gonzalez in the house. 49 likes. Awesome. How's my sister doing? Pretty good. I was talking with her earlier today. Doing pretty good. I imagine I'll get together with her at some point this week. We usually get together once a week. And then chaos, of course, ensues, because that's how that works. Going to do a demo this week on my Ivy. Somehow I had to look over because that's where it is. That's how I remember stuff. And that'll be fun. Can you buy a guitar from the Jungle website? Sure. What kind of doctor is open on Sundays, Kurt? Isn't that like golf day? I don't know. Hey, Arthur, thank you very much. Just popping in, showing some support. Brother man, well, I do appreciate that. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's true.
Sorry about that, Ben.
Hey, not a problem. Thanks, Terry.
Yep.
Put all of links to Haas's stuff in there. Mikey was asking, how's the weather up north? Wow, did it finally stop snowing? It's been snowing all day. Oh, there goes the Kleenex box. That's fine. What is the temperature? -7. Going down to -11 by the looks of things. Celsius.
Did I hear, Ben, that there was a question as to what is the white Strat with the Floyd, the same one I used at the Melbourne Guitar Show?
Yes.
Was that right? No, it is not. That one is...
Positive vibes, Josh.
That's that one that I used at the Melbourne Guitar Show.
That makes sense.
If you have a close look on the YouTube video, you'll see that at that point I hadn't actually taken the single coils out, so I just covered them with black gaffer. So the origin of how I came to use this, which is also actually just a Mexican player series, HSS Strat. That Melbourne Guitar Show performance came up pretty quickly, and it was really pretty at the last minute that we decided that we were going to play a Van Halen record. Initially, there's a whole bunch of other ideas floating around for that. But one of my students was saying to me, well, how are you going to do that? You don't have like a sort of an Eddie Van Halen guitar. And so I thought like a good exercise and something I really wanted to show a bunch of my students too is that these days, like you can buy like pretty good guitars for $1,000, and especially if you can be bothered to, change the pickups, you might get, be able to tweak it a little bit more to your personal taste, or, if you want to change some hardware, of course, you can probably upgrade the hardware. But really, out of the box, the guitars these days are pretty good. And so I just bought it straight off the shelf as a white Mexican player series, and then just put black electrical tape all over it and covered up the single coils in black gaffer. And so that's how it started life. And so it was really the guitar I used on that show hadn't been modified in any way, and I hadn't changed the pickups yet or anything. So that is literally an off the shelf Fender.
Wow, nice.
Yeah. And I thought
Stephen Douglas wants to comment. He is a doctor and he plays guitar on Sundays, not golf, hates golf. I like that. That's fine.
Fantastic.
And Randy Crooks, thank you very much, my friend, for the super chat. And he says, would you ask Simon what is the biggest crowd he's played in front of?
Wembley Stadium, which was pretty full at the time because I was touring with an Australian band called Taxi Ride, and we were doing a 3-month support to Tina Turner's last world tour, which was in, I think, 2002 or something like that. Anyway, she was doing a whole world tour. It was her last tour called 24/7, and we picked up the 3-month European leg, which was really awesome. But we were playing huge venues because pretty much every place that she was playing around Europe was a stadium. So I don't know how many people were there, but it was a sold out Wembley. So however many Wembley fits, but yeah, that'd probably be the biggest.
That'll do it. Yep.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's funny though that for me, the gigs that I'll get nervous right before aren't the big gigs at all, because they become so impersonal. And as you would know from any stadium gig, I mean, even your first line of punters are way back behind the security barriers and all of that stuff. So you're up on this huge stage and it's pretty impossible to kind of look anyone in the face, really, Like I said, even the closest people are still pretty far back. It's the little clubs where you've got someone leaning over your fold back and just looking at you, it's that intimacy that I don't really get super nervous before a gig. A little bit, of course, especially if it's an important gig, then yes. But even with that, I prefer that. I like that little feeling of the jitters, and I like the intimacy of those little gigs, where you can see everyone close up, and you can see moment by moment whether they're approving of what you're doing or not approving of what you're doing.
Right.
So whereas the huge stadium gigs are sort of, they're fun because it's a nice feather to put in the cap, but really that sense of performance kind of isn't there. And of course, I guess, if it was Wembley Stadium and it was my band and I'd written all the songs and the words and people are singing along, then that would make it more special. But I've only played in front of those kind of crowds when I'm in a support band to like a main touring artist. And the truth is that no one there was there to see us. So maybe that emotionally gives it a disconnect as well, a little bit. But
Sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's see here. I see a bunch of people talk about weather, and hello to Mark Severson and hello to Mark Taft. All the Marks popping in. Perfect.
Yeah.
Robert Ranford's here, staying high. Ryan Hall's back. Hope your mother's doing well. So he was on the phone with his mother.
I can see Joe Occhipinti in the chat. That's the very man that builds my guitars, looks after my guitars, and is one of the sweetest human beings, and is an absolute guitar genius. So yeah, if you see Joe in the chat,
I will say you build a fine looking guitar there, Joe. At least what I can see on the video here. I'd love to play one day. They do look very nice, fit and finish, and
yeah, he does. It's all the little details that Joe does that, to be honest, I've sort of struggled. There's a lot of good luthiers and guitar techs and stuff in a city like Melbourne, but as with anything in life, it's the attention to detail at the very end of it, like things, like are the frets rounded at the edges of the high E and the low E, stuff like that. That a lot of people, well, I found anyway, a lot of people will they don't really scrutinize that stuff. But of course, as we all know as guitarists, that is a huge difference to how a neck feels, is when you're sliding your hand along, can you feel the bumps of the corners of the frets, or can you not, And that's one of those things that, of course, you can go too far with too, because if you round them off too much, then you get your top and bottom E kind of slipping off when you're bending. So it's a fine art doing stuff like that. But Joe's great, and he's the kind of person where he's not happy unless I'm happy. So it's sort of a whatever it takes attitude. And sometimes we'll swap out a pickup 3 times, and he'll rewire something if he thinks that it's something niggling at him. Anytime I take a guitar to him with an issue just because it's on the road so much, he won't even bother looking at if that part, whether it's an input jack or this or that, has a problem. He'll just swap it out straight away and just say, let's just get rid of it, And I think that, I think that way of looking at things is really, really great. And it just gives you confidence when you take your guitars away,
Sure.
So,
what's up, River Docs? Good to see you, my friend. And Herb of Fireside Studios asks, favorite DiMarzio pickups for either of us?
Okay. I used to play DiMarzios a lot, actually, but I haven't for a while. Although, in this, my main touring Strat, that does have DiMarzio HS3s in it. So that's what those are. So they're kind of higher output and noise cancelling.
Nice.
I think, the semi noise cancel. I think they're not electronically noise cancelling. They're sort of high output stacked humbucker kind of things.
Okay.
But with a single coil tone profile, I would say. But they're good. They've been around since the 80s and they sound good, and they're not too overblown. If I'm going to have a guitar with single coils in it, I do still want them to sound like single coils.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree. I'm going to go with the Tone Zone. I have
cool.
one in the bridge of my Ernie Ball, and I love it. So I'll go with Tone Zones. And what's up, Chad? My Sydney brother. Yeah, to be in one. Simon, favorite Men at Work song to play?
That's a good question. I would say it's going to be out of It's a Mistake or Overkill. I used to always try and get Colin to start the show with Overkill, but he never wanted to do it because he felt like it was giving away a pretty big hit first up, you know.
Sure.
But I always look at things with set lists like that. You would look at them as a punter, you know, like if I was 18 and had played the record like 100 times and I was going to see this live, what would be the first sound that I hear that is just going to completely turn me on, you know? And I just, for me, that song is, as far as Men at Work songs, is Overkill. And I managed to twist his arm into it a few times, and especially when we were in South America, and they would just go crazy because we would turn, yeah, you know, as the crew guys are checking everything, the house lights are sort of up, and there's some background music playing over the PA. And then we would make it so we would just turn all the house lights off and all the background music off and the stage lights off all at one time. So the whole place would just go silent and dark. And then we would creep out and we would just go, bah, you know. And then when we did that, the crowds just went mental. So I remember the first time Colin tried it, he just looked at me and they were just going, and I went, there you go. Because
right there from the start.
He used to love starting with an album track called Touching the Untouchables, which is off the first record, the record with Down Under and Who Can It Be Now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good song. It was fun to play, but you can just tell it was a plotter in terms of its tempo, you know. It was just like doom, chicka, doom, chicka, doom, chicka, doom, that kind of, and it probably gave him a good chance to warm up his voice and everything, but I was just like, man,
wanting people to still get seated. That's what it is. The late stragglers coming in. You know, you want to make sure they're seated. So we'll do a throwaway song to start up. Sure.
That's right. But anyway, so it's, to me, it was just always such a sort of a fizzler, you know, when we'd come out and, you know, people have been waiting around already for a couple of hours at least, you know, the usual thing. And so I used to just say, nah, just smash open with a hit. And then you can play album tracks probably for the next 45 minutes and you've still got them on side because you've already let them know, don't worry, we'll be playing the hits, you know? So yeah, as far as favorite songs to play, you know, playing Down Under was always fun just because of the reaction. The crowd would go mental. But yeah, for me, It's a Mistake and Overkill, probably my two favorites.
Nice.
Yeah.
BC Rich 581 asks, favorite Midnight Oil song?
That's a really good question. There's a Midnight Oil album called 10-9-8-7-6, like, you know, 10 to 1 basically as a countdown. I just think that that's not only one of Midnight Oil's greatest records. I really do believe that's one of the greatest records ever made of any genre. I just think that the production on that from Nick Launay was incredible. And he was really young at the time. He was sort of, I think he'd only done like one other notable artist when Midnight Oil got put together with him in London, I believe it was. And I think he was only 20 or 21. Like, he was a whippersnapper, you know, and didn't have a big track record, but Midnight Oil had already released a bunch of records. And I think from what I've read, they were pretty dubious about working with this young unknown guy. But really, the combination of the songs they wrote and the production on that record, like, I'd say there's probably only about 5 or 6 albums, maybe 10, let's say 10, that you could do this with. Is that it would still be a record where sometimes if I'm just, you know, at home cooking dinner or something and I just in a mood to listen to some music that inspired me when I was young, I'll turn the lights down, put some killer headphones on, and just listen to that album with my eyes closed from the start to the finish, like it was a concert, you know.
Sure.
And that 10-1 record is that for me. I struggled with it a bit as a kid because it wasn't just songs, you know, like they were really experimenting. There's a lot of almost kind of in the vein that Radiohead's OK Computer ended up being, you know, where it sort of takes you on this sonic landscape journey more than just 3.5 minute tracks. So was the question, what's my favorite Midnight Oil song?
Sure. Yeah.
I forget.
Yep.
Well, it's going to be something off that record.
I'm going to choose myself Beds Are Burning only because they got paid as a result. You know, that's the money maker. So
that was their big money, and a great song, a really great song, you know. Yeah, that was what they got paid good for that, which as they should. I think for me, that's going to be tough. There's a sort of a ballady thing on the album called Scream in Blue, which I just think that the Peter Garrett's vocal performance on that, for someone that's not really like a singer's singer, you know, you sort of came more from a punk background, but his singing on that's incredible. US Forces, that's a great song. That's fun to play as well. I don't know. They're all good. Read About It, I like. Yeah, but if anyone isn't familiar with that record, I would really say please give it a listen. It might not be your cup of tea, and it might even sound kind of dated to the ears that we all have now, but I don't think it does. I think an album that's that well produced, it would be like saying Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon sounds dated, or Radiohead's OK Computer sounds, because to me those albums don't date really, you know. But yeah, check out Midnight Oil 10-1 if you don't know it, and it'd be definitely really interesting to know what you make out of it, and for anyone in the chat too, because it's really, the guitar sounds are really, really unusual. They're thoughtful. That's why I sort of think of OK Computer, because it's like that too. You can tell they spent a lot of time not just recording the first thing they plugged in, you know, like they were messing around with different combinations of guitars and pedals and amps, and the Midnight Oil album is like that too. Like it's cool. Very, very cool.
Nice. Christopher Butler asks, have you ever tried Kinman pickups? He's an Aussie manufacturer. Apparently good stuff.
Makes great pickups. I have come across them, of course. And no, my guitars don't currently have any. But I did have a couple in the past that had already had those pickups put in. But a student made me an offer on those two that I just absolutely could not refuse. So the student owns those now.
See people agreeing on the Midnight Oil stuff. Nice.
Yeah.
Guitar Man 45 asks, has Simon played here in the States?
Yes, quite a lot, actually. I'd done a bunch of touring with Men at Work through the late 90s and early 2000s, mid 2000s as well. And also with Tommy Emmanuel, I've toured through the States. I can't remember when was the last tour with Tommy. That was probably 10 years ago that I went through the States with Tommy. And yeah, I've developed some great friends. If I end up finishing a tour and staying in the States for a little bit, it will tend to be in LA, just because I've got friends there, you know. But
sure.
But yes, so mainly with Men at Work and with Tommy Emmanuel.
Nice. Here's a good one. Oh, it's a tough one. Favorite AC/DC song?
That is tough. That's tough for anybody to answer. I'm going to let you go first, Ben. Do you have one that comes to mind straight away, or say even two or three?
Yes, one that comes to mind, because again, set openers, crowd right in the palm of your hand. If you open a set with Riff Raff, forget about it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, for sure. All right. there's there's a song that I just love to listen to, and to occasionally, if I get to play it on stage, it just ends up being the funnest jam, which is There's Gonna Be Some Rockin'. I love, I think there's something else on Dirty Deeds. It's a slow song called Ride On, which is just it's just the dynamics in that are so cool. And it just reminds me of like a blues band playing in a bar somewhere at 2 a.m. while the staff are sort of almost starting to pack up, with wooden tables, and they're just they're just cruising,
Yeah.
And you don't get to hear the modern AC/DC cruise like that. So I love some of that really early stuff that where it's dynamic, But look, I love For Those About to Rock. And there's a couple of things on that album that I really like, that they're escaping me right now. I love the Back in Black album as well, and a lot of the stuff on that. But yeah,
we got Lawrence Petros himself in the chat. We were talking up pretty good about half an hour ago, my friend, and he says, "If you want blood, great intro." Yes, I will.
Killer intro.
Agree. Another great set opener.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Lawrence, we were just talking about I was talking about some sounds and regular things on the pedal board. I'm talking about the 87 pedal, which is still there as my favorite lead sound. So thank you, brother, for building that. That is a fantastic pedal.
Yeah, basically mini series like Swallow, Bon Scott, and Back in Black. Sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I would say so. I'd say most of the Bon Scott stuff I really love, and then For Those About to Rock and Back in Black.
It harkened back to the 60s as much as anything else. There was a lot of rock and roll. They still did the roll. A lot of swing, a lot of boogie. Very
that's
traditional.
Exactly right. That's a really great way of putting it, the rock and roll, because there was those shuffles and the swings and boogies and what I really, really love about a lot of the Bon era stuff is, I really just saw them. They're almost like a bar blues band, And
that's how my dad, I played them for him, as a young teenager. I'm like, what do you think of these guys? And he's like,
yeah,
that's one of the best bar bands I've ever heard, but they're only a bar band. He goes, they're not a stadium band. They're a bar band, but they're the best bar band I've ever heard, probably. It's like, well, I can see that.
It's true. Anyway. Yeah, I mean, if all you'd ever heard is the albums they did in the 70s, they sound like a bar band, right? But you'd never think that stuff could translate. But they were very, very clever, and because they're great musicians and songwriters, they really managed to sculpt through the 80s when it was more about stadium rock than bar bands. They managed to keep their identity. It still sounds like AC/DC, but they managed to do it in a way that kind of sculpted that blues bar band stuff into stadium rock but keep the core of what they were. And that was their ace, really, wasn't it? Because they did it so seamlessly that it didn't even feel like it was contrived or whatever, which maybe it wasn't. So that's fine too,
Hey, Clayton James Hicks, what's up?
I think, getting Mutt Lang on board, that was really where, because everything that Mutt does is naturally has a stadium kind of application for it,
Yeah, he makes a point of leaving space in the music for that.
I think so too, and it doesn't matter which album or band or artist that he's produced, pretty much, I would say nearly everything that he's touched were the kind of artists that eventually started playing stadiums. So,
what was that question? Philip SBS, has there been a better frontman than Michael Hutchence? Saw them on Kick, and he had the crowd in the palm of his hand. So charismatic.
Yeah, he was definitely one of the world's great frontmans. He was charismatic. He was kind of you know, even in his sort of physical movements on stage and stuff, he kind of had that loosey goosey sort of thing, you know, like he'd have the big open white shirt and his shoulders would be moving, oh, kind of Jim Morrison style, you know.
Yeah.
It's almost like he took a leaf out of the Jim Morrison book but then made it his own, you know, and took it into the 80s. And yeah, what a great front man. That's that's sad that when he went. But I toured for 10 years with an Australian singer called John Stevens, who actually was the first and non-TV show contestant replacement singer for Michael Hutchence. So he was, and John's great too, because he has a lot of those things, but yet he doesn't look exactly like Michael, and he's not exactly like Michael. But he had that same kind of sex appeal for the ladies, and he had, you know, he had that broad-shouldered open shirt thing that he could get away with, and he could sing all the notes exactly. It was, I was very lucky. I got to see his first show with In Excess after Michael died, and it was at a small club in Melbourne that was completely unadvertised, and it was invite only. And they even had a, you know, like a, what do you call it? Like a car learner's plate, like an L plate hanging from the microphone stand, because it was the first ever thing they'd done live, and they just done a couple of weeks of rehearsals, and it was just a small gig with 300 people that in the Melbourne music industry, and it was fantastic. And I just thought, wow, that's a perfect replacement for Michael, because he's not trying to be Michael and he doesn't look like Michael, but the essence of Michael was really there, you know. But that didn't work out ultimately, which is sad. So they did stuff for a couple of years, but it became obvious to John that they didn't want to include him in any future writing, and they just want to employ him as a sort of a paid session singer. But John had already had like huge records with his own band in Australia and New Zealand, so that he wasn't really into that. You know, he didn't want to just be a sort of a puppet for hire. So ultimately, of course, they went this.
Yeah, it's one thing when you hire basically a quote unquote unknown to fill the role, but if someone's had any kind of an established career, yeah, it doesn't really work that way. Yeah,
that's tricky. And he had a career not just as a frontman, but actually as the main writer of his bands as well.
Right.
So yeah, so that clearly just wasn't going to work out. But yeah, Michael Hutchence, killer.
Let's see. What's up, smallmouth guy? Good to see you. Eric Warrington in the house. Yeah, we've got some good questions here tonight. I dig it.
You'll have to read them to me. I apologize, Ben. I apologize to anyone in the chat. I don't have my glasses on at the moment, and the distance that the laptop is sitting away from me, I can't. I'm waiting on those prescription specs. So apologies.
Quite all right. So I suppose we could ask, what is the signal chain for the Yngwie Malmsteen sound?
Okay. I've yet to kind of completely lock it down, but what I'm going to do is, at least initially, is try and do it as authentically as what he did it in the 80s, because that's the era of the album that I'm doing, the trilogy record. And I also think that of all his records, my favorite sound of his is the one on that trilogy album. And so after doing a bit of research, I found out that really all he was doing was using plexi, and kind of in between what most people would do. So most people would use a plexi clean, like I was talking about before, and then letting the pedals do the heavy lifting. Or they do the opposite, which is like Van Halen, which he would dime the plexi and use it for the distortion. And really the only pedals then in the front are kind of modulation effects, you know, like the phaser or whatever. What Malmsteen used to do was he would, and I think he still does this, like pretty much, he runs the plexi so it's not clean or fully dimed. It's right in the middle. It's a Goldilocks zone, shall we say. And the porridge is just right. So I found that with my plexi, that tends to be with the main volume on about midday, 12 o'clock. And so it's kind of what would you say? It's like a bluesy, maybe slightly less distorted Jimi Hendrix tone, if that makes sense. Or if you want to think maybe of Hendrix's sound on, say, Little Wing or something like that, where it's not like he doesn't have the fuzz on, you know?
Right.
That Stratty naturally just Strat and amp kind of blues sound where it's semi-distorted. So that's Malmsteen's starting point. And then he used to use the DOD 250 preamp. And he would have that dimed and run that into the front of the Plexi. And I remember when I read that, I thought, hang on a minute. I used to have one of those little guys and I hadn't seen it in years. And so I thought, I've probably sold it or given it to a student or, you know, something like that.
Sure.
Anyway, I rooted around for it in the garage. And plus, because I moved house 4 years ago too, I thought, I've got no chance of knowing which box this would be in, even if I did have it. But I found it and I thought, okay, this is going to be really, really interesting. So I set up the Plexi head in the studio. I put my vintage 4x12 in the garage and mic'd it up and closed all the doors. And then I ran the DOD 250 preamp in the front and boom, just like that. I was like almost exactly the sound of that record. And obviously I fooled around a little bit with, because I didn't know exactly how he had the two things set. I messed around with, okay, what happens if I turn the gain on the pedal down, but the volume on the Plexi up, and then vice versa. And, you know, so I just sort of tried to see which zone that they both went in. But I found that the tone that's pretty similar is with the DOD turned all the way up. The only problem, and it's a pretty big problem, is that it's noisy as hell. That pedal, it's an old pedal, and with the Plexi already starting to have this sort of background sound from the gain, this thing on the top is like, I mean, the background noise is almost as loud as the note you play on the guitar. It's crazy. So I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to get to it later this week, where I'm actually going to do the usual thing where I'm going to say, okay, the DOD 250 is the right tone, but it's not really practical. I mean, Malmsteen used to use a noise gate back in the 80s. I think he used the Rocktron Hushes, you know. I'll use a noise gate if I have to, but I would prefer to not, because there are moments in the show where you roll your volume down a bit and clean it up. So yeah, I'll audition some other things. And one of the first things I'm probably going to audition, of course, is the LPD 87, because that's what I've been using for my Malmsteen-ish tone recently at the Guitar Wars shows. But I was running the Plexi super clean, so it's going to be a bit hard to say. But my gut feeling is good, and I know it'll be heaps quieter. So, but yeah, I mean, what I'll do once I've settled on like what I consider like the proper, like as close to the original 1987 Malmsteen sound, I'll do a video and put it up, and so you can see where I end up settling with it.
Nice. Guitar Man 45 says, I have a Rockman or Rocktron Hush. I bet you do.
Awesome.
He has everything.
Yeah.
He has everything.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear the final tone result. And I don't know, maybe Lawrence can release his take on a DOD 250 that's a lot quieter.
Well,
I'm just going to throw it out there.
It never even occurred to me to throw that ball up into the air. But wow, I mean, that would be something very unique and special. But maybe what I'll do, I think the first thing I'll do is maybe I'll even put up a video, or even I can just make one for you guys where I do a recording of a video and recording in Pro Tools of where I'm sort of at with the Plexi and the DOD, which is, like I said, that's how Malmsteen used to do it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, wow, I'd be open to any ideas if we could get the same tone, but
mm-hmm.
A little quieter than the DOD pedal. But yeah, very interesting idea.
Yeah,
it'd be cool. It'd be, be an opportunity to maybe tweak it and take it even a fraction further than because the DOD preamp's a very, very simple thing. It's just two knobs. I think it's just volume and gain. Yeah.
Richard Nagamitsu mentions there's a JHS version of the 250, but that's not the Lawrence version. I'm just saying.
That's right. That's right. But yeah, where is it? I think let me see if I can find it for anyone that hasn't seen one of those guys.
Sure. Michael Crow says supposedly the MXR Distortion Plus is the same circuit as the 250, but they sound different. I had a Distortion Plus. I haven't had 250, and that's ridiculous price, a small mouth guy for a 250.
Yeah, there it is.
Nice.
So this is an original one with a real heavy cast iron case. These things weigh a ton, but I'm not sure from what year that is, but I know it's definitely old. Because I opened it up and had a look at and thought
it's gotta be early 80s.
Me trying to make it. Could be
Early
period correct, that one. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely old and crusty. So, but anyway, it gets the right sound. It's just crazy noisy. Yeah.
And Philip says that's so cool. I've never seen one. See, there we go.
Yeah. They are very cool.
Robert Ramford had a question. Here it is. Does Simon use modelers like a Fractal, Kemper, Neural DSP at all?
I do. I don't use them all the time. I use them just when, really the thing for modelers for me is, and they sound better and better every day, but I use them. What they do greatest is the convenience and the flexibility. But if it's a choice and I can take a real amp and pedals, then that's my preference. But for example, I think you already know this, Ben, that the Melbourne Guitar Show Van Halen thing I did, that was a Kemper.
Mm-hmm.
So, sorry, who asked the question, Ben? Who was that?
Robert Ramford asked the question.
Yeah, Robert. So if you on my YouTube channel, you can find the Van Halen performance of the Van Halen 1 record, and everything you're hearing on that YouTube is the Kemper direct. So there's no microphones miking up boxes in that signal chain for what you're hearing on the gig itself. Yes, I did that for front of house, but what you're hearing in the video, that's the audio. That's just the Kemper direct, because we had a problem with, I thought it would be really cool to blend the Kemper direct sound with some of the mic'd up Greenback Celestion sound, but we had a problem with the microphone line on the day. So for the video, it just ended up being cleaner to just use the Kemper direct, and it sounds pretty good. It's all the modelers, like I haven't played personally with a quad Cortex, but I've heard heaps and heaps of stuff online, and I would say to my ears, they sound, when someone does an A/B with the original amp in the room and the quad Cortex, I think it's actually closer than the Kemper, But these are differences you can probably make up for just by moving the tone control a little bit, So they're not crazy big differences. But yeah, so I do. And when I'm recording in the studio doing guitar sessions for people, if I've got the time and the luxury and the budget is right, then what I'll do is I'll mic up my amps here at home. Or if I don't want to mic them up, I'll use something like the Fryette PLIR, which is like a reactive load that you can record with cabinet IRs and stuff. Honestly, I'm sort of old school. I really like, if I've got the time, like I said, and it's a session that's important to me. If I'm like, say, it's doing someone's blues record, I'll always prefer to mic up my amps, just because I find it more fun. It obviously takes way longer, and it annoys the neighbors more and all of those things, but it's just more fun for me. I like all that stuff, that feeling from when I was a teenager and first went into a recording studio, where people would be running around like making mic lines, and it felt more like an occasion, like a process. And so I'll do that at home in the studio if I've got the time. But if I don't have the time, then I'll quite often use amp modelers in Pro Tools too, whether it's Amplitube or Amp. I even still use the old version 3 of Amp Farm sometimes in Pro Tools, which is the one from 20 years ago. But
Right.
I've found that if you run it through. I've got a couple of like cool little outboard things like a Tube Tech EQ and an 1176. And I find if I run my guitar through those on the way in, I can almost use any amp modeler and then just add a bit of room ambience and I can get it pretty close, you know. The advantage with doing that, of course, with a modeler or using a modeler inside the computer is if I'm the one mixing the song, or if it's, you know, a demo for myself, it's one of my songs, and I decide I want to change the guitar sound at the last minute in the mix, then I can just change it. So, so the modeling stuff is great for all of that. But yeah, as far as live, I tend to not much. I would say the main reason is I think you need to be on a pretty big tour for an onstage modeler with, say, in-ears and stuff like that to work for you, or at the very least, if you're not wearing in-ears, that you would have the same monitor engineer and taking the same fallbacks around with you. Because using, I for a while, I started taking the Kemper to gigs because I was really excited about it when I bought it, and it's such a powerful machine that I thought, this is so cool. I don't even have to take a heavy amp anymore. I just take this thing, plug it straight into a DI, and I've got my same exact guitar sound in my wedge everywhere I go. But of course, what I didn't take into account is that the wedges are not the same everywhere you go. And sometimes you get one that's clapped out and is a piece of crap, you know? And that means that then for the whole 90-minute guitar show, my guitar sounds like a piece of crap, you know? So on a big tour where you're taking the production around and you're taking your monitor engineer around with you, then I think it makes sense. You know, if you're touring, playing guitar for you know, Ariana Grande or Pink or whoever it is, and you're a session guitarist, that on that level, a modeler makes sense because they also don't want your guitar amp on the stage. That they've got to have it free for all the other, you know, dancing and everything. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. But yes, I do use them, and I did use them on the Melbourne Guitar Show. And if the question to that would be, why didn't I use my plexi and stuff then? It's because I've done enough of these expo things where I know you're just one band out of 5 on the day, and sound check time is often either none or really, really limited. And I knew that to try and even half pull off a Van Halen thing with any authenticity, people are going to be all over the sound. So I thought I can't risk that. I would take my plexi, and if the plexi went down, then I'm stuck because no one else there is going to have an amp that sounds right. So for that, the Kemper seemed like an obvious thing because I could work on the sounds at home quietly or with headphones even, and get them as close as I could to the album. And then at that point, I just turned up to the Melbourne Guitar Show. And as it turned out, we got no sound check because the PA blew up. So it was actually really, really lucky that I took the Kemper, because really then we just took a DI straight out of the back of it, and that became the sound that you hear on the video. So, yeah. For Malmsteen, I don't think I will do that, even though it would be logical to take the same approach. But it's a bit simpler than... There's a bit less wrong that can go wrong with a plexi when you're not diming it, when you're just using it normally. So, and also if I had to borrow somebody else's Marshall head, I could probably get it in the ballpark in 30 seconds, you know? So that's why with the Malmsteen thing, I think I'll just go balls out and, you know, do it loud.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Charles 75N asked, what would your dream rig be?
I don't know. I guess over the years, I've already handpicked the kind of things that I really like, you know? So I think having a great old plexi, it doesn't have to be old. There's some incredible reissues now, you know? And people like John Sir builds the SL68, which is an incredible amp, you know? I think having one old plexi in your kit, if you play any kind of rock and blues, is good to have. I've got an old 40-watt single 12 Fender Blues Deluxe that I have had since 1996, I think, and has been everywhere with me and done all my local Melbourne gigs. In fact, it's such a workhorse that I used to fly interstate with it. Sometimes I'd get called by this friend of mine to do these like beach gigs, you know, and we would just play like every night in the front window of the bar in the Whitsundays in Queensland, which was always fun. But I never had a road case for it, so I would literally just put it on the conveyor belt, just the amp itself, and fly with it interstate, which is probably stupid. Obviously, I don't think I would do it now, but I have to say, never had any problems. I didn't bother taking the tubes out. Nothing. Just would put it, just check it through as if it was a bag. And anyway, it's an old beat up thing. It looks like it's from the 50s. I've used it so much, but it sounds really great, and it sounds very different to the Plexi. So
yeah,
I would say, as far as like, look, there are some amazing boutique amps. You know, Freeman builds great amps, Fryette builds great amps, and there's a whole bunch of other guys on the scene too doing great stuff. There's obviously Jason Tong here in Melbourne, who's from Head First Amps, who's just come out with his, you know, big 3-channel thing, which I've yet to get my greasy paws on, but I definitely want to really hear that, because I think that's going to be fantastic. Sure. But I think that maybe for me, having an old Plexi and an old Fender combo, and then maybe like a Vox of some kind, I think that between those three, you can pretty much cover anything. And that would be it for me, because anything else you can make the amp do by putting great pedals in the front, you know. So, but I think that I'm a big believer that the amp should sound really good on its own before you put pedals in the front. I think that's the best method to getting any kind of great sound, because I mean, I really believe actually the sound of the amp is more important than the sound of the guitar. I really do. Just over all the years and all the sessions I've done, if I'm using somebody else's amp, or the amp in the studio, or a backline thing, and it's not good, I mean, it doesn't really matter what pickups I've got in my guitar, you know, or anything like that. It's those things that make a difference, and they can make a really nice personal difference to you, but it's not a big enough difference as the amp, you know. So I think that an old Marshall, an old Fender, and then like maybe some like newer kind of boutique 3-channel thing, like the ones I just mentioned. Like, I think that's probably a good thing to have in the kit these days. I've had some Mesa Boogies, you know, and higher gain things, but I just tended to not use them that much in the end. You know, I just kind of, I found that for my personal taste, I could get even a really cool metal high gain sound by using the Marshall. And actually, sometimes what I would do is record with the Marshall and the Fender at the same time, but with a pedal going in and splitting going to them both. That can be a really cool way in the studio, because then you get these two kind of different sounds that you can blend, you know, kind of like having your cake and eat it too. But so Dream Amp, I've never really, I mean, people talk about if you ever can get to, you know, play a Dumble, that's like one of those like once in a lifetime experiences. I've never personally played through one, but I don't know. I guess I've just discovered over the years that there's so many different ways you can skin a cat, that if you've got like some really nice classic amps, and they don't have to be crazy expensive, then with that and some, you know, a couple of good guitars and a bunch of good pedals, you can pretty much get any sound you need, you know.
Sure. I agree. Is there a dream guitar that you want?
Dream guitar? No. Let me think about that. I mean, I would love some really old Strats and Les Pauls and things like that, like old vintage ones. But there's not a particular style of guitar that I don't already have that I would love. I mean, most of my guitars are kind of relatively cheap put-togethers, like we were talking about before with Joe Occhipinti.
Sure.
You know, I think that if you start with decent woods, I mean, you can fine tune all the rest. You know, you can change the hardware and upgrade that.
Sure.
You know, obviously the FU tone stuff is fantastic for doing that. You can change to any pickups you like. There's so many great boutique pickup builders now that if you want to spend a little bit of extra money, you can get some great stuff. I really, really like the bare knuckle stuff. That's working for me at the moment. But there you know, there's plenty of other great pickup builders, Pariah, of course, and you know, Kingman you mentioned before. There's people building great stuff. So I think that, I mean, okay, like I could give you a quick rundown. This might surprise some. Like there's nothing that I'm currently using that's really very expensive at all. So this one, which is the main guitar I'm going to use for the Malmsteen show, is Joe sourced the body and the neck. And so it's got the big 70s CBS headstock on this guy.
Love it.
We put a bare knuckle trilogy suite set of single coils in it, which sound awesome. They're kind of like Tim Mills describes them as almost like P90s, but in a single coil, you know, enclosure.
Sure.
But they're really, really awesome. So that's that. I think, I mean, obviously Joe's put a lot of labor in, and so there's that cost. But the actual parts, the wood, the body was, I actually can't remember, but not more than $300, I don't think. And the neck was maybe $150. And that's Australian prices. So for you guys, that'd be even less, right?
Sure.
And then, you know, standard Strat bridge and some pots and a few things. So this one's a complete put together from Joe. The Van Halen one I used on the Melbourne Guitar Show was, like I said, a Mexican Strat that was worth about $1,000. And I didn't change any of the pickups or anything on that. That's just off the shelf. This one was also a Mexican Strat. I changed the pickups to the Damasio HS3s, and that's it. That's all I did to that one. So that's $1,000. That's my main touring guitar. And this one was also a Mexican Strat with the configuration that you see. I didn't do any routing or anything. It was just an HSS with a Floyd. I changed these to bare knuckle mother's milk single coils for a real like vintage Michael Landau kind of thing. And the humbucker is a bare knuckle VH2. So that's that. I mean, and there's a whole bunch of other things that I could show, but really nothing's crazy expensive. The other thing for me is I don't want to feel nervous traveling and working with a guitar that I paid, you know, $5,000 plus for, that I don't want to get a ding in case I want to resell it. Mine are all work. They're all used to be played, and they're just workhorses, you know, which means that, you know, sometimes you've got a crew guy setting your guitar on a stand on a stage at soundcheck, and then you're off to get a coffee and you hear bang and you look over and it's fallen down because I didn't, you know, I just like to not have to worry about stuff like that. So if it falls down, you know.
Exactly.
But yeah,
I agree.
So no is a short answer.
Well, there we are. I think we should probably wrap things up here because it's been an awesome show with great questions and greater answers. You know, I might be biased, but that's the way it works. It's my channel. I'm allowed to be.
That's right. Well, yeah, thanks everyone for the questions. And if anyone has anything they want to ask me after the show, obviously you can DM me or hit me up on social media. So.
Yes. Which, yeah, definitely. And, you know, if you're in the Melbourne area in 4.5 weeks, go on over to the Guitar Show. Well, if you're watching this and you're in that area, you're already going to the show. Who am I kidding, right? They're already going to the show.
Yeah. Look, the doing a Malmsteen record note for note is definitely one of the bigger challenges that I've ever taken on. And so sink or swim, the show is going ahead. So if you're in Melbourne and can come along, then obviously great. Come and watch, you know, whether I manage it or whether I don't. But the other thing that I'll be doing is someone said to me, a great idea is, since you actually can't play it yet, is do like little daily Insta posts or something like that, where you're sort of taking people on the journey of your practice routine and the things that are tricky. So I'll be doing a bunch of that on my socials too. So
cool.
If anyone wants to follow along with that, then please do.
Awesome. I agree. I already am following. You should too, folks. Well, housekeeping, 1 week from tonight, we got Aaron from Albus Band coming on. And then tomorrow night, we got Canucks with Guitars with myself and Trev and Terry, live Q&A.
Fantastic.
And this coming Saturday afternoon, 1 p.m. Eastern, I don't know, adjust accordingly, we'll be doing our channel members and patrons Zoom hang. So that's always fun. So block out some time for that. All you guys with your toques next to you and your names in green in there in the chat and the patrons and stuff. Always a fun time. That reminds me. Yes, I got to do up an exclusive video this week because we had a new month starting this week. So I got to make some videos. So yes, if you want to hold the line, Simon, till after we wrap up, sure. I want to thank everybody that tuned in tonight, each and every one of you, new names, returning names, all that great stuff. Welcome again to the new channel members. Special thanks to anybody that contributed tonight. Shout out to the mod squad. You know, they got the wrenches. They know how to turn wrenches, I guess. And hold those doors open. Let my knees hurt ahead of you in traffic because he's probably going to work. He doesn't want to go, but let him. Doug's wife's real. Happy tone chasing. And of course, don't litter. Just don't.
Why do you scream at me? Why do you think that it's free? It's not a choice made by me. Once we fall,